Okay, Chris, is that okay? Volume? We're at the maximum level.
Okay.
So you can hear me well enough now?
Yes, we can hear you well enough. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Dear friends, this is amazing event. This is a great pleasure to welcome all of you and to welcome Mr. Dunbar to our fireside. There will be two opening prayers. The first one will be read by or sung by Jerry York in English. The second one will be by Ruha Mateen in Spanish. So it is now 7:30, and Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're on mute. Unmute yourself. Unmute, Jerry.
There we go. You should be able to unmute now.
Ready?
Okay.
O thou kind Lord, unite all, make the religions agree, make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family, and the whole earth as one home. Make all mankind as stars, shining from the same height of glory, as perfect fruits growing upon thy tree of life. O thou kind Lord, unite all, make the religions agree, make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family, and the whole earth as one home, as one home, as one home.
Oh Señor compasivo, tú que eres generoso y capaz, somos siervos tuyos al abrigo de tu providencia. Dirige hacia nosotros tu mirada de favor. Da luz a nuestros ojos, percepción a nuestros oídos, y comprensión y amor a nuestros corazones. Regocija y alegra nuestras almas mediante tus buenas nuevas. Oh Señor, indícanos el sendero de tu reino y resucítanos a todos mediante los hálitos del Espíritu Santo. Concédenos vida eterna y confiérenos honor infinito. Une al género humano e ilumina el mundo de la humanidad. Que todos sigamos tu camino, anhelemos tu complacencia e indaguemos los misterios de tu reino. Oh Señor, únenos y enlaza nuestros corazones con tu lazo indisoluble. Verdaderamente, tú eres el donador, tú eres el bondadoso y tú eres el todopoderoso. Abdul Baha.
Thank you, Ruha, Jerry. Friends, it's a great delight and it's a great joy to be able to welcome Mr. Dunbar here. And by the way, Mr. Dunbar, there's a bunch of people here that formerly served in Haifa. You probably recognize some of their faces. But to introduce Mr. Dunbar is originally from Los Angeles, California area. And in his younger days, he was an actor on stage, screen, and television, and he made movies with Columbia, MGM, 20th Century Fox, etc. Then in 1958, Mr. Dunbar moved to Latin America, where he served in various capacities in Nicaragua and elsewhere for many, many years. Uh, Mr. Dunbar is also an accomplished painter, and his pictures, his paintings hang in the home of lots of people in the world. He had a studio in Spain. I don't know if he still does, but he used to have a studio in Spain. But nevertheless, for those of you interested in art, please look up some of Mr. Dunbar's paintings, etc. Mr. Dunbar, as a Baha'i, has served in various capacities, both elected and appointed capacities. And he served on the Universal House of Justice, which is the highest spiritual and administrative head of the Baha'i faith. This nine-membered body guides and directs the affairs of the Baha'i community worldwide. Um, I remember Mr. Dunbar, frankly, by standing in line with him at the food line in Haifa in the ITC building from many years ago. So it is really a supreme delight. It's a great joy for us to welcome Mr. Dunbar. I want to share one additional thought with you that there is at the bottom of your Zoom a chat section, and I'm going to ask all of you to put any questions that you have in the chat section, and we will at the end, depending on how patient Mr. Dunbar is with us, try to read out as many of the questions to Mr. Dunbar as possible. This will keep us from making long drawn statements, so we'll just simply ask the questions. Again, we're delighted, Mr. Dunbar, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, friends. So many different places and different faces. Some of them I recognize, and others I think you've changed maybe since the last time I saw you. Some I used 20, 30 years ago. Defining world religion is the topic of the discussion presentation tonight. It's a very interesting one. I was pondering about this the other morning. I was thinking that, there's recently been a TV series about discovering the planet where we have a view of the moon, and then the Earth comes up behind the moon, and we see the planet for the first time in its wholeness. And this is a mind-changing experience when of course, when we had the first lunar visit some years ago, it brought this feeling of the oneness of this small planet. It's too small to not be united. It has too many difficulties and differences now that from the point of view of the Baha'i message, that is the message brought by Baha'u'llah, it's the wish of God to see all the peoples as the followers of one faith. Now are we all going to switch religions? That's not likely. So what are we talking about? He then offers us on behalf of his creator, on behalf of his maker, and through this power of revelation, which certain chosen souls have been endowed with through successive centuries in the past. And those verses then describe for us the religion of God that God invites us to. And it's a religion suddenly, as seeing the planet and seeing it as one whole. Baha'u'llah presents this vision of religion as one whole. There's one creator, there's one divine being who, through his actions, has called into existence the universe, and he sustains the universe. It's not like someone who created something and then cast it aside and is busy doing something else. He is right here with us. And it's becoming to him that all the beings, everything is dependent on his energy, on his majesty, on his sovereignty. The additional mystery that he describes for us, that God has left it to the human soul, which has been given the capacity to recognize the messengers of God. And we see how millions and millions over the last several thousand years have embraced these great messages of God, the message of Abraham, of Moses, of Christ, of Muhammad. And he says that these faiths, if we examine carefully, we'll see that they're only one religion. They're one faith, which is a terrific truth. Then he goes on to prove that, not just state it. And he says that if you examine the scriptures of the past, you'll see that each of the religion, the heads of the religion of the past, the scriptures of the revelation, the revealed guidance that manifestation of God has given to us, you will see that each one confirms the previous message. And none of us have had any problem in our faith recognizing the previous faiths. It's interesting, Abdu'l-Baha points out that Christianity propagated Judaism to the whole world. The Old Testament was known in the Holy Land. It was in Hebrew, and it was not well propagated in the world. But with the coming of the Christ, all people came to know about the law of Moses and the teachings, the divine teachings of Judaism. Then now with the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, he declares that the Jews and the Christians are people of the book. They are indeed, as he says, they are Muslims themselves, in the sense that Muslims are those people who are submissive to the will of God. And so he calls on all of us to examine, independently investigate the truth of the scriptures of the various divine religions. If we want to just stick to our own scriptures, we're not going to make the request that he makes of us to independently investigate truth, to not depend on the hearsay of our forefathers, but look into the reality of our faith. We will begin to see the oneness and wholeness of these scriptures. And then we'll be prepared to think about what Baha'u'llah has said, that the founders of these religions have two aspects to their character, a twofold nature. And one nature is divinity itself. It's the reflection, the full-on reflection of the sovereignty of our Creator, the essence, the central orb, you might say, of the universe, who sustains and maintains. It says their voice is a single voice. So that if one of them says, I am the speaker on the mount, or if he says that I am, as Muhammad said, I am Jesus, I am Moses. And we think in ourselves, looking at that, how naive, who's going to understand or believe that? But through the explanation of Baha'u'llah, we realize that at one level, the voice is the same. So when it says, I will return unto you, it's that voice that's going to return unto us. But it comes in another being. That is another creation of God. like the Christ, who came down from heaven, and yet he was born from the womb of his mother. So we have the Christian prophecies that we know about the coming of the return of the Lord as a thief in the night. You'll be in the house and no one knows he's in the house, like the thief. Extraordinary. And then finally, his coming is manifested, but not before a lot of opposition. Part of the character of founding of a new religion, the appearance of a new messenger, one of the proofs of him is that he's persecuted and reviled to the maximum. And this has been the case of the two manifestations, as the Baha'is call these messengers of God, manifestations of the names and attributes of God. Twin manifestations in this day, as referenced in the past holy books as well. And these two are Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, title means the glory of God, and the Bab, whose title means the gate. Their successive manifestations began in the middle of the 1800s, and together with the appearance and appointment of Baha'u'llah, of his eldest son, as the center of his covenant, establishes three central figures for the Baha'i faith. And this is the call of God in this day that's received this form. And it's a renewal of religion. It's the restatement of the same eternal truths, but provided now with a setting of secondary laws with respect to the time that we live in. The third of these central figures, Abdul Baha, the servant of Baha, has explained to us that religious laws are in two categories. One are the eternal laws of God, the existence and oneness of God, the eternality of the soul, the existence of life after death, and the call of the individual soul to overcome the veils, shred the veil, if you will, of self-love, of ego, and of passion, particularly carnal passion. Those are the two things that keep us from seeing reality, he says. But it's in the nature of God that he has created us so that we have free choice. We can turn, we can hear the message and we can turn to it, or we can turn away from it. Baha'u'llah has called upon the Baha'is to proclaim the message that he's brought to mankind. Let them know that a messenger has come. Let them hear that the message promises to resolve and rejuvenate, renew the world of mankind through these teachings. And at least that's the basic proclamation that we are called upon to explain to people. Now the people, some of you are hearing about this for the first time. You will need to hear a little bit more. We're going to talk a bit more about the content of the revelation. It's up to you. Has something been touched in you? Do you feel attracted? Is this something you say, I've always felt that way? Or they may speak to the Baha'is and say, well, I'm so pleased that you found something that satisfies you, and go on with their atheistic, materialistic outlook on existence. Now, defining religion in the era that we live right now is particularly challenging because people have abandoned religion, basically. Even those that still follow the outer rituals of the different faiths have a large element of doubt about what they consider unscientific truths or teachings, beliefs that their religions evolve. Fortunate for us, the interpretation of all these various mysteries of the past has been opened by Baha'u'llah. He's opened, as he said, the choice sealed wine that's been mentioned in the Old Testament. And drinking of that, it solves all those problems of between the different faiths, the differences between the different faiths. And Baha'u'llah himself says that he is one in this series of divine messengers, and he is the one that's been promised by all the previous ones since the time of Adam. And therefore, we should take a very close look at what he's brought. They are the teachings of the day of God, he tells us. But this day is a different day from the past. We've come to the threshold of maturity. That mankind, through these various religions and their teachings and their guidance, have moved through the social developments of family unity, tribal unity, the unity of city states, and then finally, with the coming of Muhammad, the recognition of individual nations, nationhood. With the appearance of Baha'u'llah, his message is supranational. It's beyond national interests and combinations. It transcends those and brings remedies at a universal level for the laying the foundations of world order. And this is a fascinating subject and is treated of in great detail in the Baha'i writings. One of the great advantages we have, because the proofs that Baha'u'llah established for the proof of his mission, he says the first proof, greatest proof of the manifestation of God is his own self, that such a being can appear who is reflective of the omniscience of the Creator, who can answer anything you ask him, who can explain all the hidden mysteries of the natural realm and give you reasons for why the things are the way they are. Extraordinary capacity. If you can't see that in him, then he says that you should examine the power that he has of revealing the verses of God, those verses which then constitute scripture for the faith. And the Baha'is have a huge range of divine scriptures from both Baha'u'llah and his forerunner, the Bab, who also constitutes one in the link of progressive revelations, as he calls them, of the Creator. So here we see a pattern that if we can grasp it, if you will but believe, if you will but think and concentrate and weigh these things in your heart, you'll see what a terrific release of anxiety lifts from you, because you see there is a plan. We're not abandoned, and we have the next step in where we're going as a human race. And it's a path that transcends political prejudices, racial prejudices, religious prejudices, social prejudices of all sorts that need to be examined and cast aside. We're, I think, in part of the process of ridding ourselves of age-old racial prejudices that have just become part of our tradition and very much need to be examined, and we need to know history. We need to see these things. And Baha'u'llah says, nothing in this day can be hidden. Everything that's been done in the dark of night will be revealed in the plain light of day. And so we see things that were hidden, crimes and different things, they're all coming out in our history. Quite interesting. Now you might say to yourself, but how can a man like me know all these things? Of course, one, he's not a man like you or like us. And secondly, he's endowed with another level of capacity. just as the vegetable has certain limitations to its power, the minerals, the vegetables, and the animals all have limits to their own reality. And we see fairly clearly what there are. In the lower kingdoms, we see it. When it comes to man, we see the capacity, intellectual capacity has the power to explore the world and discover the secrets of nature. Inspired, definitely inspired in that sense. And Baha'u'llah says those things, those divine sciences and knowledges that we're discovering and applying and that are transforming our society. Think of the transformation in human society with the digital age that we've come into from 20 years ago. We're living in a different universe. It's just, it transcends entirely what we had in the past and has opened up all kinds of new possibilities. But again, science by itself opens up capacities for both evil and for good. And it is the inspiration of these divine messengers of God that holds the evil part of the discoveries that we can make in check. He gives us the capacity to render metals into steel and to form machetes. Then this machete can be used to destroy woodlands and to chop down weeds and all kinds of useful things, kill snakes, if you will. But it also can be used to attack our fellow men. And so there needs to be constraints on and a way to strengthen the moral and ethical vision that mankind has. And that gives us the third proof that Baha'u'llah suggests for the understanding who are these messengers of God. His own being, the power of his words to transform people when they read them, how these words, the verses sink deep into their souls and are the means of illumining them and endowing them with the power of faith. And then the third, he says, are the actual content of those verses, the teachings themselves, principles that are set forth, verities established, which come from no other source than these wonderful messengers of God. And they are singular in their report, if you will, throughout the ages. Something that struck me when I first heard of the Baha'i teachings was an explanation someone gave of that the body, our human body, all of the cells of it are under the control of our souls. There is this an intelligence in our system which adjusts and heals us of various things. Now we're pretty fast at destroying ourselves in different ways, and that power sometimes acts and heals us, and other times it doesn't. And Abdu'l-Baha himself says that the explanation for this, why is it you're not healed by this power at every instant? He says in some cases, if you were healed, you would go on to do improper acts and deeds, things that are not good for your soul. So he maintains you in a sick condition to help restrain you from your own excesses. Very interesting. But the soul, obviously, to do that, has to have an understanding, the autonomic understanding of the whole system, the nervous system, all of the different organisms of the body. And it has the power to turn the mirror of its being not towards the dark and lower things of life, but to the higher teachings of these messengers of God. And those teachings then have the capacity to transform them. And this is the rebirth that Christ speaks about. He who was born of the flesh is flesh. He is born of the spirit is spirit. You need the baptism of the Spirit, the baptism of fire, and the baptism of water. And he explains those are symbolic of the baptism of the love of God, the fire of the love of God. And then the baptism is the water of life that gives us the constancy and steadfastness in obeying the laws of God. He also tells us first to know and then to love. We need to know things and then we're attracted and love them. Now, in the case of the manifestation, who is another degree higher than animals and human beings, he has the animal body, he has the human soul, but he has another plus. And this has been referred to in the past usually as, say, the power of the Holy Spirit. But let's say it's a divine spirit. Or let's say in modern parlance, is a higher consciousness. He has a higher consciousness. What does that imply? And it's been said that it means that he has, just as the man and the soul has its knowledge of each of the cells of our body and of its requirements, and is aware of its state and what it needs and what's dangerous for it, what's good for it, and so on. So likewise, the manifestation of God, when he looks out upon the human race, that is all races here that live on the face of the planet, his one level of his spiritual consciousness, of his inner being, is made up of our individual souls. They are the cells of his most great spirit, so to speak. And on the basis of that, he can prescribe remedies for the illnesses that afflict the body of the human race. The shortcomings with respect to the robe that's been provided by the previous religions to invest us with a lovely covering and the face of a divine civilization, that power which has produced these terrific arts and developments in the religions of the Far East, also part of the divine plan, and in the religions of the Abrahamic evolution that we've come through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Think of the beauty of Islam, the coherence of the architecture and decoration, for example, of Islam. Each one of these prophets of God has brought into being a higher civilization. We're at the very early stages, as you can imagine, 150, 200 years of since the Bab and Baha'u'llah were born into the world and arose under the influence of their creator to deliver their message. This is not yet mature, and it's not yet received the full brunt of the opposition of mankind, which will propagate it throughout the world in a much keener, quicker way. People want to know, why are they attacking this? Why is it being attacked? And it's the former religions that are generally the religious leaders of the past, which will call attention to the fact that this doesn't conform to the way we understand our holy books. And yes, indeed, if you look in 2 Peter, he says that the writings, the scriptures of God are not open to human interpretation. And yet human interpretation has chosen from those scriptures the very means to defeat the recognition of the fellow religionists around the world and kept us from being the people of one shepherd and one fold, which is our birthright and our promise. Now, friends, this faith of God was spread around by various disciples, apostles, by itinerant teachers, by pioneers, as the Baha'is call them, until it reached the ends of the earth. And the teachings have now been rooted in enough countries that we have 180 Baha'i national spiritual assemblies represented in 180 nations and sovereign states of mankind. When Shoghi Effendi was asked to explain, he was the great grandson of Baha'u'llah, the grandson of Abdul Baha, and the world head of the Baha'i faith for 36 years, from 1921 to 1957. And he's given us a wealth of guidance, of interpretation of the meanings and implications of the messages of the three central figures of the faith. And he has described for us, when asked by a United Nations committee that wanted to know what the role of the Baha'is was with respect to the Holy Land, the then known as Palestine. And he says that two things mark out the Baha'is' claim to world religion. One are the writings and statements of Baha'u'llah himself, the very scope and nature of what Baha'u'llah says. And the other, he says, is the extent that it's spread over the whole face of the earth. And that these two things should cause us to, if not immediately rejoice and acclaim the reality of this, such a faith, of such a message, but to investigate it, weigh it. We've been given a rational mind with which to do that. And we need to sensibly think about these things. Further to that, I wanted just to share this evening, in the course of the spread of the faith around the world, a wonderful Baha'i teacher, a woman, without many means, spiritual means, but not material means, traveled. But she had the opportunity of having an interview with the Queen Mother of Romania, Queen Marie of Romania, during her travels during the late 20s and the 1930s. And she shared, with all the sincerity and inspiration of her heart, she shared these teachings with the Queen. And the Queen was immediately touched. And then she read some Baha'i books. And after that, she gave a testimony to the guardian of the faith, which she said he could use in writing about the faith and the tributes which it received from various leaders of thought and others. And these are the words of Queen Maria of Romania. It is like a wide embrace, gathering together all those who have searched for words of hope. It accepts all great prophets gone before. It destroys no other creeds and leaves all doors open. The Baha'i teaching brings peace to the soul and hope to the heart. To those in search of assurance, the words of the Father are as a fountain in the desert after long wandering. It is a wondrous message that Baha'u'llah and his son Abdul Baha have given us. They have not set it up aggressively, knowing that the germ of eternal truth which lies at its core cannot but take root and spread. It is Christ's message taken up anew, in the same words almost, but adapted to the 1,000 years and more difference that lies between the year one and today. If ever the name of Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha comes to your attention, do not put their writings from you. Search out their books and let their glorious, peace-bringing, love-creating words and lessons sink into your hearts as they have into mine. The great Russian author Leo Tolstoy was in touch with the Baha'is. The early Baha'is were called Babis, the followers of the Bab, and then they became, with the declaration of Baha'u'llah, of his mission, they became Baha'is. And he writes, the teaching of the Babis have great future before them. I therefore sympathize with Babism with all my heart, inasmuch as it teaches people brotherhood and equality and sacrifice of material life for service to God. The teachings of the Babis, which come to us out of Islam, have, through Baha'u'llah's teachings, been gradually developed and now present us with the highest and purest form of religious teaching. What a testimony, friends, from the author of War and Peace. A bit more I would like to share about some of the content of Baha'u'llah's revelation. Again, he refers, as I mentioned, to the general character of the growth of the Baha'i community in every continent of the globe. And in that sense, it can be regarded in no other light than a world religion destined to evolve in the course of time into a world embracing commonwealth, whose advent must signalize the golden age of mankind. This is the age in which the unity of the human race will have been unassailably established, its maturity attained, and its glorious destiny unfolded through the birth and effervescence of a world-encompassing civilization, as Baha'u'llah's promises for the future. At the same time, Abdu'l-Baha said the future of the human race, of humanity on this planet, destined to become one people and recognizing himself as one human race under a single God. He says that the future is very bright. The distant future is very bright. And Shoghi Effendi said, without saying it directly, Abdu'l-Baha was saying that the immediate future is rather dark. In fact, the darkest it's ever been in the history of the human race. He's coming on us right now, and we're coming into this phase, which is the forces between the forces of light and darkness that are clashing with each other, the materialistic, unholy doctrines of establishing false gods in place of God, of putting nationalism as a god above God himself and his rights, and again placing race, the idea of one nation being more important than any other nation, is the source of most of the evil in the world, along with the fact that those that promote the superiority of one race above any other race, they're all the children of God. They're all the creatures of one creator and of one divine plan. And third, communism, the raising of that one social class should take precedence over all other social classes and indeed destroy anyone who didn't conform with that. These are the great tragedies of our time, the darkness of our time, along with the secular transformation in our education. Now, nobody's saying go back to how the religions taught children in the past, but we need to have the counterpart of science, the other side of science, the metaphysical side, the invisible side of how the universe is sustained and controlled by spiritual forces that come from the revelation, that are clearly stated, are divine in nature, and are the source of all the good and benevolence on the planet. The fundamental principle I've mentioned here of Baha'u'llah's teachings is progressive revelation, along with the fact that religious truth is not absolute but relative. That is, it's relative to the time we live in. We need the truth of divine teachings expressed in a way that corresponds to the requirements and requisites of the time we live in. It won't do for us to follow the physical laws of Judaism, of the time of Judaism, when it was not clear to people that eating pork, for example, that had been in the sun was the source of disease to them. now we understand these things, and so the laws have changed. We have exceeded in beyond any limits the use of alcohol, and we have societies that are broken, where a great percentage of the adult population are now alcoholics. And Baha'u'llah addresses this and says that we must give this up. There are certain things that are humbugging the progress of the human race. Now we have all the new drug culture to deal with. It's a very, very, as you will agree, I'm sure, a very dark time we're living in. Yet the remedy is at hand. The progressive revelation that we're talking about, which will enable us all to see ourselves as the followers of one God, and all religions of the revealed religions of God as true. So he states, Shoghi Effendi, in summarizing this, he says, these are the 9 aspects of progressive revelation that the followers of the Baha'i faith firmly believe. We have said the first one, that religious truth is not absolute but relative. The second, that divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process. Nobody can chain up the hand of God. Nobody can keep him from sending new messages. And no one can deny that the great need to have a new message in this age, when we finally understand the character of the oneness and wholeness of the planet. How could Christ speak about the globe being one globe? The world back then was flat. That was what people believed. Everybody believed. Heaven is on high, hell is down below, and we're in the middle here. Now we know through science that that's not the case, and we have a message which corresponds to, again, to a recognition of the wholeness of the planet and its peoples. That all these great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony if we look carefully, that their aims and purposes are one and the same, that their teachings are but facets of one truth. Their functions are complementary. They're progressive in that new things are added and adjusted, and this is a growing process. They differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines, these social teachings which require renovation from age to age. And their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society, as we were saying, down through this recognition of the family, the tribe, the city-state, finally nation, the establishment of nation, and now unity, world unity, the recognition of a single entity, which is the human race on the face of the planet, under one God. Well, Frenzy, we're moving along. I don't want to use up all of our time for some questions and answers that you might have. I'd like to just take a few more minutes to survey some of the basic teachings of the Baha'i faith, apart from progressive revelation. We have them set forth by Shoghi Effendi in one of his messages. And I'll read those for you. It's the easiest way to get through them, and that may prompt some other kinds of questions on your part. The Baha'i faith upholds the unity of God, one single God, and he's not an unintelligent force. He has a consciousness, he has will, he has intention with his creation. Recognizes the unity of his prophets. It inculcates the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race, proclaims the necessity and inevitability of the unification of mankind. It's coming, friends. This blessing is coming. Asserts that it is gradually approaching through much burning and, if you will, um, purging and welding finally. The pieces, the elements of the human race are suffering to that degree, which then makes their hearts susceptible to unification, to comprehension, mutual comprehension, and they become then gradually a single social entity. And that's what's going on in the age, as I understand of what Paula is saying. That's what's going on now. Then he says that nothing short of the transmuting spirit of God working through his chosen mouthpiece in this day, in other words, through Baha'u'llah, can ultimately succeed in bringing all this about. Previously mentioned, the faith enjoins upon its followers the primary duty of an unfettered search after truth. It condemns all manner of prejudice and superstitions, these things that have grown up that are not part of religion, but have become part of religion by being added on by the clergy, and declares the purpose of religion to be the promotion of amity and concord. That's what they've come for, not wars and destruction. Proclaims the essential harmony of the religion with science and recognizes it as the foremost agency for the pacification and orderly progress of human society. It maintains the principle of equal rights, opportunities, and privileges for men and women both. That women in this day need to come into their own. They have a soul, and same as a man, and they're perfectly capable, under the right circumstances and education, of participating in all facets of human life. He insists on compulsory education for the whole human race, as he has uh, condemned and forbidden the existence of clergy in the Baha'i faith, for example. And in past religions, he said this is now, God has removed the capacity of the ecclesiastics to lead mankind. They should have recognized the new messenger when he came, and they didn't. And therefore, their capacity to influence the masses has been greatly reduced and continues to be reduced. So he has abolished the institution of priesthood. We don't need a mediator in the sense of priests in our communities. And he has prohibited slavery, asceticism, mendicancy, and monasticism. Mostly these things that isolate you from the rest of the human race. He prescribes monogamy. He discourages divorce. He emphasizes the necessity of strict obedience to one's government. Baha'is everywhere living under different kinds of government, and he tells us not to meddle in political matters, that we should be promoting the international principles that Baha'u'llah has brought for the establishment of one world order. He exalts work that we perform, any work that we have in the spirit of service. He says this has, in the eyes of God, the station of worship, of prayer. That's very interesting. It depends, of course, on the spirit in which we're serving others. He suggests and urges the creation or the selection of an auxiliary international language. And finally, he delineates the outlines of those institutions that must establish and perpetuate the general peace of mankind. It's not some, just hopeful proclamation of universal peace, but he brings the whole vision and the order that's necessary to be established amongst the nations. And they will come to this gradually, he assures us, through their own politics, through their own interaction with each other, until they finally proclaim the oneness of the human race. And this is the coming of age of humanity, is what he refers to as the lesser peace. Then finally, through some, what I think will, if I understand correctly, will be several centuries, we'll have the spiritualization of that political unity through the recognition of Baha'u'llah's life-giving teachings and promises. So there's just a taste for us. And we haven't yet even touched on the history of the central figures themselves, the sufferings and the terrific persecution that they underwent, and why they were not then more readily known to the human race while they were here on the planet. He addressed the kings and rulers. He addressed those responsible for the masses at his time, but they didn't respond favorably. Well, I don't know, I may have stirred up some difficult
Thoughts.
questions. Let's see what you have to say, please, whoever's.
May I? There are two questions here, Mr. Dunbar. One says, please expound on religious truth being relative and not absolute. Can you expound on that?
Well, the emphasis, the central principle now of the recognition of the oneness and wholeness of the human race, this is a truth which is relative to our time. It was not relative, although not unknown, to Christ and to Moses and to Abraham, but it was impossible to make it as a central element of the faith, because we didn't yet, the world had not been explored. We had people had from one side of the world didn't know anything about the other side. That's one kind of a thing. Now, another thing that is a bit more off the wall, so to speak, but I think is not beyond the possibilities, because Baha'u'llah proclaims that all the planets have creatures. That is, every sun that's fixed star in the heavens has a solar system around it. And now these things are born, they die, they're born, and new ones are born and die. So but the universe continues to exist. And he says all of this is thriving with life. The same mineral, vegetable, animal, human, divine being hierarchy exists in all of these realms. Abdul Baha says that in some of the worlds, it's created in conformity with the chemical constitution of those realms. So if we want to hear a list of the laws which will reign between our contacts with one of the near planets and ourselves, which a manifestation of God would have to define, that would be a religious truth that is relative to that time and not to our time. We couldn't understand it. In fact, it sounds like completely foolish. And I think it's just that simple. It is the truths which apply to our understanding at the present time we're in. The truth in that sense is very fluid, and it flows with the interaction between human intelligence.
Just a moment.
Just a moment.
Hmm.
Between human intelligence and the truths that are being proclaimed through the revelation, which under whose influence, whose dispensation we are residing now.
Okay. This one, would you please elaborate on God's will and the will of humans? How can I discern the fine line between the two in our affairs? God's will and human will.
In our faith, yes, that's a very important point, in our faith, because that's the thing that makes the distinction. You see people lamenting and say, I don't know what the will of God is for me, and so on and so on. Study his writings. He said he hasn't fallen short of giving the guidance to the human race, of which we are a part. And he, through the steps he takes that we should go to for our own individual spiritual transformation, we gradually come into a level of being able to distinguish. and we begin the battle of fighting against our lower natures, a battle which Muhammad described as the most holy war. You've heard him talk about, the Muslims talk about holy war. He said the most holy war is the battle of the willful soul against the will of God. We are made to conform to the will of God. When we conform to the will of God, we take on something of the divine nature. Very mysteriously says the knowledge of God is the knowledge of your own true self, because we've been created, as Genesis has told us, in the image and likeness of God. His image has been engraved upon us, but presently it's veiled with these veils of self-love, egotism, and of carnal desires that we want to fulfill what we want and we don't want to follow the law of God. When those two things are addressed in a human being, I think the rest of what God's will for them as individuals in the course of their lives becomes manifestly clear.
Okay. This one, I'm going to just read it. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made flesh, and that Jesus was the Son of God. Would it be accurate to say the Word is the Son of God? Uh, should I read it again?
If you like it, that'd be good.
Okay. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made flesh, and that Jesus was the Son of God. Therefore, would it be accurate to say the Word is the Son of God?
There's one phrase in there that's been altered slightly. It says that, and the Word was God, is in
Oh,
most of the translations. But in any case, that's indicative because it shows you that the God that we know and understand is the manifestation of God. That is the Christ figure, or Moses, or Abraham, or Muhammad, or Baha'u'llah. They, in their inmost being, are the face of God for the human race. They're like step downs of the divine energy that they are in touch with, and they give to us to the degree that we can bear the kind of knowledge that they're revealing to us. Um, so the question of the manifestation of God is in a position to say, I am God, except that he is who he is, and I am who I am. There is a difference, but one so manifestly represents the appearance of the other that that word becomes God. Now, the other thing about that, the divine truths as revealed in the Surat al-Haykal, the tablet of the temple that Baha'u'llah has revealed and written, which has been published now in English, is that the manifestation of God while he's amongst us, living in this world, is the presence of God. He's the divine presence. He represents the appearance of God. And with his coming, God passes by. This is the title of a very important Baha'i book, God Passes By. The manifestation of God makes his appearance and he disappears again. And Baha'u'llah says, while he's alive, he is the point to which you should turn in your prayers and supplications. He says, he can address through Baha'u'llah to God, you can address to Baha'u'llah himself, and you can also express straight to God himself. But without the means of the manifestation of God, your capacity for that is much more limited. It's much greater when you can use he who is the Word of God, the living Word of God, as the mediator to witness the powers and blessings of God. God is love. So many things that have been stated, they all have to be seen in the light of the oneness of the inner reality of the manifestations of God. And in the Gone, Book of Certitude of Baha'u'llah, he says, all things live, move, and have their being in the manifestation of God. Think of that in terms of what we were talking about previously, that he has awareness of every human reality on the planet simultaneously. You know, one thing doesn't keep him from doing something else. It's a different kind of mentality, which is inconceivable to human nature. We can hear it described, but we can't really make it our own because it's beyond our capacity to do so. And it's part of the plan, intention, and wisdom of God to have created it in this way.
Okay. This next question says, is it accurate to say that Baha'u'llah has authored over 100 books the size of the Bible, and they are in the archives on Mount Carmel?
No, that's not accurate.
No, it is not.
By inserting the Bible and 100 times the size of the Bible and so on, that makes it inaccurate.
Okay.
His writings were collected under his command by his amanuensis, his secretary, Zain al-Mugarrabin, a very great Baha'i, very devoted Baha'i, and a terrific calligraphist. His penmanship was extraordinary. And he was the main writer of the final versions of tablets. The writings of Baha'u'llah were called tablets. And when he would reveal a book, a draft would be made because the secretaries tried to take it down, but his chanting and the luminosity of his being were so overwhelming to the secretaries, they could hardly get it down. But they got some things down. Then together with Baha'u'llah, he would edit and tell them what was missing and add the words and so on. Then a clean copy would be made. And then that would be either, most of them were addressed to individuals or to groups of individuals, and they were sent out. But Zain then, in clean copybooks, would enter the text of the tablet. And Baha'u'llah has written in one of his own writings, he said, any of my words that are in the hand of Zain are authentic without any signature or seal. That's a pretty high level of trust. And he also said, because of the sanctity of this man, anything he asks of God would be given. Well, okay, everybody's smart enough to know that he didn't use that power at all. In fact, he was the first one to avoid taking any requests from anybody, he said. But so he wrote these into these books, and they form 100 volumes of handwritten books. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. Depends on the number of tablets in that particular period that were revealed. But they're there preserved. I've seen them, I've witnessed them. I've seen light pencil markings in the margins, down the margin of passages which you now see have appeared in the writings, in the gleanings, or in the writings of Shoghi Effendi, like The Promised Day Has Come or The Advent of Divine Justice, where he quotes these wonderful passages. They've come from his gleaning of these volumes. Now, they've all been digitized at this point. And it's possible for the House of Justice to ask the research department to produce a compilation of those which refer to justice, for example, or refer to moderation, or refer to world language, or whatever it may be. And they then come forth. But also sometimes the writings were sent out without being copied into those books. And even there were larger works that came back while I was there and dealing with the research in the World Center for the House of Justice. that are extraordinary pieces. It'll take a long time to straighten it all out, but the world vision of the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, has gone over the whole range of these things and chosen those things that he was inspired to choose to guide us in our understanding of the world faith for the time that we live in.
So a friend asks a question, Mr. Dunbar. She says, sometimes I will meet someone who wants to know in a brief statement what is the faith. I struggle to contain the ocean in a teacup to offer somebody for a drink. Do you have a proverbial brief elevator talk that can state to someone what the faith is all about in a brief 3 minutes? I struggle with this. The ocean continues to overflow the teacup.
Most of what I've quoted for you this evening and cited comes from a summary of a brief resume of the history, aims, and significance of the Baha'i faith, which was prepared by Shoghi Effendi uh, originally for the High Commissioner of Palestine, so that he might understand what the significance of the faith is in its presence in the Holy Land. And the second was in 1947, a special commission created by the United Nations of very distinguished people. I don't know, there were 30 people on the commission. It was a large commission. And they requested Shoghi Effendi to give them a statement about the role of the Baha'i faith in the world and in particularly in the Holy Land. And that statement has been published a number of times. It's in some of the older Baha'i World books. It's been published as a pamphlet, The Faith of Baha'u'llah, in America. It's available. Seek it out.
Mm.
It's a very good foundation for speaking on all the aspects of the faith and the history of its three central figures and of the significance of its administrative order, which was born after Abdu'l-Baha's passing, and of which the Universal House of Justice is the present head.
I think it's also the preface to The Promised Day Has Come. That statement that the
Some
Guardian
editions
made to
also
yeah.
the preface to the World Order of Baha'u'llah Letters. It's been also published there separately, extracts from it, if not the whole thing. It's very useful. It's amazing.
Okay. For those of you that are online, S Funk, I don't remember the first name. Mr. Funk has sent out a PDF of the summary statement. To it's on. He just sent it out online, so all of us have it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Sharaf Funk.
Sandy Huning points out the teaching conference materials that the friends have been studying has a great introductory statement about what the Baha'i faith is. Also in Anna's conversation, there's a brief introduction to the faith.
Yes. Yes, those are helpful supplements as well.
Okay. There's a question here. Can you present the question? Oh, she's asking me. Can you present the question on the definition of will? What is will? The will of God, the will of humans. What does that mean?
That would be nice if I could tell you that. Terrific. I'm speaking tonight from my own understanding of the Baha'i teachings, and this isn't anything authorized, and you have to go back and check again what I'm saying against the writings and the teachings themselves. I like to think I know what I'm talking about, but I find out from time to time progressively that what I thought was true before is not true. It's something else is true. So And Shoghi Effendi said that the more we study the writings, we will come to find that our previous notions about what they meant were erroneous. Because our mind, our consciousness, through the power of the revelation, expands and takes in much greater scope and can be inspired in very particular ways, as Baha'u'llah describes in one passage in the Book of Certitude. You will be endowed through longing and fervor to penetrate the meaning of the texts of God. You will be endowed with a new eye and a new ear and a new mind, and you'll distinguish truth from falsehood at 1,000 meters or 100 meters or whatever it is. Extraordinary potentiality in each of us if we apply ourselves carefully to the studying and meditating on the revelation itself. This is what a gift.
I
Will, I
I
don't
may
know.
have gotten
Will,
Gita's.
you know, you want to read the
Sorry.
writings. I'll tell you about the will. You could look at the writings of Nadir Saidi, who summarized the subject of the writings and teachings of the Bab in a book called Gate of the Heart. And there he has chapters on the will, and that the manifestation is the primal will. He is the point from which the primal will flows. And the will is expressed in two ways. In the verses themselves that he reveals, they are all reflective, the highest reflection of the will of God. So the verses, what you want to look at the divine verses, and particularly and most accessible for us are the hidden words. And this is a tremendous source of distinguishing what is the will of God. Now, each of us has a different set of endowments, a different way of viewing creation, a different eye, or I can't say different eye, but a different cast of vision that enables you to see things that other people may not see. And we're then would be able, hopefully, to express those things in our interactions with each other. Baha'u'llah says, when we go to the next world, we will want to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. A sanctified soul is a soul who's overcome love of self and passion and shines through the mirror of his inner reality, which has its own shape and endowments, reveals or is the fingerprint of God for that human being in creation that he can share with other human beings. And this is why we get so excited meeting each other and talking to each other. And this is the nature of the human race, so we should enjoy the bounties that each of us is receiving from God. But we're a long ways from that, as you can see now, with all this terrible contention and strife going on. I wish I could tell you more about the will of God. I'd like to know. Maybe I wouldn't like to know. Maybe knowing the will of God is more disturbing. But basically, the answer is, where's the will of God? For heaven's sake, the manifestation came and taught for decades, revealed all these teachings to school us in the will of God.
Sharaf has posted two quotes from the writings. Should I read them?
All
It's
right,
your-
sure.
Okay. The first one says, only when the lamp of search, of earnest striving, of longing desire, of passionate devotion, of fervid love, of rapture and ecstasy is kindled within the seeker's heart, what happened? Within the seeker's heart, and the breeze of his loving kindness is wafted upon his soul, will the darkness of error be dispelled, the mist of doubt and misgivings be dissipated, and the lights of knowledge and certitude envelop his being. At that hour will the mystic herald, bearing the joyful tidings of the Spirit, shine forth. Uh, God, joyful, shine forth from the city of God, resplendent as the morn, and through the trumpet blast of knowledge will awaken the heart, the soul, and the spirit from the slumber of negligence. Then will the manifold favors and outpouring grace of the Holy and everlasting Spirit confer such new light upon the seeker that he will find himself endowed with the new eye, a new ear, and a new heart, and a new mind. He will contemplate the manifest signs of the universe and will penetrate the hidden mysteries of the soul. Gazing with the eye of God, he will perceive within every atom a door that leadeth him to the stations of absolute certitude. He will discover in all things, he will discover in all things the mysteries of divine revelation and the evidences of everlasting manifestation. He's quoting from the Kitab-e-Hikam.
Yes, that I was paraphrasing some of that. Obviously, this is
Mhm.
so important that we don't think that that's something reserved for the true seeker. We're the true seekers. We are the ones that are supposed to be searching after these realities. We shouldn't lose sight of that because we become busy with our activities. It, it gives added strength to our social actions and contributions to society if we have uh, enlightened human vision, understanding, spiritual vision
Mhm.
of these. And he says there that we begin seeing with his eye. Enough of the writings, and we are told we must come first. We have to see with our own eye and not with the eye of others, and gradually we have to come to see with his eye and not with the eye of others. And his eye, of course, comes through uh, meditation and thinking profoundly about his writings. At least that's what I understand by.
Okay. Uh, Mr. Dunbar, if somebody says, I want to study the Baha'i faith and know more about it, what are the 2 books or 3 books you would recommend that he or she read?
And it's a big field. I don't know. It depends a little bit on the character of the individual that you're talking to, what the person is, what his interest might be. Sometimes it's easier to start with a subject that attracts the individual from the Baha'i teachings because there is such a range of teachings on so many subjects. But it was amazing how many times youth were referred, when I was investigating the faith, youth were referred to the Seven Valleys. It was so appealing. I suppose something like definitely like the appeal of Rumi has in the modern day. You know, so many people say, I'm not interested in religion, but I'm seeking spirituality. What an indictment of religion that is. Religion is supposed to supply the spirituality, but instead of that, I have to search elsewhere for it. Not in faith. The spirituality is coming through a devotional attitude. And our Baha'i communities are based on devotional meetings. One of the core activities of our Baha'i faith, devotional activities, and eventually with the building of Baha'i temples around the world, with visiting the house of worship in the mornings before we go on with our affairs, like the hub, the center, pulsing center of every Baha'i community.
This question is obviously from a Baha'i, Mr. Dunbar. He asks, could you say something about Dr. Arbab and Mr. Martin?
Well, I think, basically you want to look very carefully at the messages of the House of Justice, the tributes that have been issued from them. And step out from there. Um, my own knowledge of them, they were very dedicated souls, and they were very sincere in their understandings. And the they collaborated in the House of Justice at the level of drafts of some of the very significant documents that the House of Justice then edited, further edited and published, like the Prosperity of Humankind and One Common Faith, and indeed Century of Light itself was as a first discussion in the House of Justice, then drafts, and then revisions of drafts, and they Douglas had an inspired, very able pen. He was really extraordinary. And Dr. Arbab had a vision in so many directions, special directions and understanding himself. I would imagine that they're rejoicing being back together again after the limitations of being former House members. Not an easy occupation.
uh, Ms. Dunbar, we've kept you for a long time, and I know we had promised that around this time we would end. Um is is Can I ask if you have any final thoughts, any final comments you want to share with us? Um,
You know, it's for both the Baha'is and for the non-Baha'is to hear. I don't think it's it's inappropriate in any way. The guardian of the faith, Shoghi Effendi, said that the Baha'is must learn to depend on the divine confirmations. We want to study the writings, we want to pray, we want to meditate, we want to study, and then take action as individuals. Now, beyond that, we have collective activities where we carry the result of our prayer, our meditation, and our study to the collective activities of the community. Now, sometimes you see the Baha'is, by jumping into the collective activities without necessarily much attention to the individual preparation that one has assigned in the revelation and in the verses of Baha'u'llah himself, um, we tend to get discouraged. We work and we want to see more result, or we want to have more reward from it, and that doesn't happen. Uh, it needs at an individual level to recognize the requirements. The duty Baha'u'llah has assigned, he has assigned occasionally to institutions promoting the uh, encouragement of the Baha'is. But there we go back to the individual again. The individual needs to be teaching the cause and needs to be absorbed in the propagation of the faith 24 hours a day. He's got to think about it a lot, along with his other things of his life and use of the greatest name. And he has to trust. He prays and he trusts that when he has a chance to say something about the faith, that some of this divine inspiration flows through him, not from him, not from her, but through them. And he said that those are the teachers that change people's souls. And we want to do our best to take on the qualities and the character and the intention and the sincerity which would allow this inspiration to flow through us to other souls. Then he says it doesn't belong to them, it belongs to God that generates it. And it comes through angelic hosts that surround us. Look at the verse at the beginning of the prayer books about that he who recites the verses of God, the scattering angels of the Almighty will take the influence of that The other world needs our expression of our own will, giving our will while we're in this world to his needs, and then that is the cause of the propagation. It's amazing that God is given in every dispensation. The believers have received the inheritance of the revelation. They have to go and propagate it. And through their sacrifice and through the giving of their lives, the first lights of God have gone forth. I think of Christianity 300 years before it came to the general attention of the masses through the conversion of Constantine. 300 years. So we're here at of the revelation itself. What is it? Began in the mid 1800s. It was 150 years already. Now it's beginning to be known and recognized, but still a lot of people are in a position to deny it. Bob says caution about not following it is very detrimental to the progress of the soul in the next world, to hear about it and not follow it. And secondly, he says that if you attack it, the position is much worse. You become an opponent to the light. Then you don't want to embrace the light when you go to the next world. So there's some darkness left there for you to embrace, so to speak.
Mr. Dunbar, there's several
Stop
messages
me before I
thanking
say
you.
anything else detrimental here.
Sorry. There's still several more questions out there. It's entirely up to you if you want to end or whether you would like to answer a couple more
Well, do you
questions.
think the friends are still up for more answers? I don't know, or attempted answers here?
I think
It's all
so.
right for me. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here, and I'm alone in my studio, and nothing can happen except I fall asleep, and then you'll have to shout at me here.
Somebody asked the question, how do you walk your days with all this accelerated dissonance?
Accelerated what?
Dissonance. Am I spelling
Dissonance?
dissonance? Yeah.
Okay. How do I do it? I don't know. I sink under it a little bit, and then I say, no, this is, and I try to go back to the writings again. You know, the Guardian said that the gleanings should be the constant companion of every faithful believer. This is his take from all of these 100 volumes of Baha'u'llah's writings of representative passages on many different facets of the teachings. The gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah, very important book to have by your bedside, to have with you, to have on your telephone, however you're going to have it, and keep going back to it. And when you finish reading it, put the bookmark at the beginning of the book again and go through it again until it becomes familiar. And the same thing with prayers and meditations. What a book filled with divine truths. Oh, that's such a blessed book. Sharif and he said he hoped that that book more than any other would enable us to draw nigh unto Baha'u'llah, that he might draw nigh unto us. Question.
Last question. Last question. I'm not going to ask any more. In pursuit of the truth, in a new concept, how can we discern the human intellect and understanding and the intended meaning of the teachings? How do we understand the intended meaning of the teaching?
I would think if I'm understanding the question correctly, intention of the teachings means the divine purpose that's in the writings that we want to be drawing nigh unto. And in that, we want to be careful that we don't make the human intellect compete with that, thinking that we understand the intention. Because the degree to which we understand things is excuse me, is progressive in character and goes by stages. And so this is why we need to not finish studying the Agon. Every time some weeks pass, months pass, a year passes, and we go back to it, we have changed enough that we will perceive things in a different way. Because if we're saying our obligatory prayers and things, we're visited by tests and difficulties. God has his eye on us. He's developing us. He's maturing us. He's protecting us. Everybody knows what the next thing they need to correct in their lives is, but it's not always pleasant to recognize it. Abdu'l-Baha says we know we're trying to get over some habit or some attitude or some understanding that is erroneous. And we pray and we resolve to not do this action or not do something again, not repeat it again. And then we find we've repeated it the next day or the day after or many days. And then he said we come back again and we have this prayer and we ask him to remove this difficulty and to cure us of this shortcoming. And then we resolve that we're going to resolve it. We're going to take care of it this time. I'm determined, you know. And we go out and we fail again. And Abdu'l-Baha says that failing of the individual gradually drives him to desperation, that he can't change, that he can't transmute himself into something else. That this depends on the divine elixir. This depends on the will of God and the purpose of God. So then we throw ourselves upon God. Finally, in the end, he says the soul throws itself on God, said, I can't do this. I'm incapable of changing myself in this degree. Please take it from me. And then that the soul is relieved and the test comes back and it's not a test anymore. But right under that level of the onion, there's another level waiting to be cured and resolved. And so we go through these progressive stages. And that's part of living with the dissonance. That's part of adjusting our lives and adjusting our intellect. We should be very cautious with intellect. It's very tricky. The world around us tells us that intellect is the ultimate source of knowledge and understanding. And indeed it is, but it then needs to be tempered by the revelation. We learn as children all these movements that we do, discovery of relationships between things. There's this fervor in us to acquire, and those are the tools and means that the material world provides us to be able to understand spiritual matters. The world of creation is a book which teaches us through all of these signs of God that make up this world, teaches us how to understand the book of God. Think of the book of God, all it does is talk about material signs. I mean, it talks about trees and suns and wind and fragrance and so many things that if we didn't have the experience of this life, it would be more difficult for us to understand them. Abdu'l-Baha says the souls that pass away not having been born or aborted here, they go to the next world, they're taught in the schools of the kingdom. And then they're raised there. They do go through a maturing process there. Whether that's more advantage, I think, of course, you're going to be your education would be much more exacting there than the one we have here. But if we're not too willful and we keep turning to the revelation and we keep begging for illumination and guidance and to partake of the cup and the chalice, and we remain steadfast, I'm hopeful that we'll, through the mercy and kindness of God, we'll make the grade. And I'm hopeful for you all too.
Yeah. There's a suggestion for you, Mr. Dunbar, from an old friend in the East Coast, Sue Emil. She said this would be a good book title, Mr. Dunbar, Living with Dissonance.
Living what? The testament?
Living with dissonance. Am I
Oh,
pronouncing the word
living
correctly?
with dissonance, yes.
Yeah, she said that's a good book title for
Okay,
you.
I'll have to think of that. I'm not much
Uh,
of a writer. I'm more of a speaker.
there is not enough words we can use to say thank you to you, Mr. Dunbar. It's really a tremendous delight to have had you here. And on behalf of the Austin community and all the friends that are gathered here, I really truly want to thank you. This has been an evening of great joy for all of us.
Well,
And I think
I can tell you that it provides me with that too, that just being asked and being able to take the time and share some of the thoughts and things that are in my own spirit at the moment. I appreciate it. And I'm
good
very
to know that. Good to know
pleased
that.
to have been with you. Thank you.
We will call, if you say it's fun, we are going to call you back again very shortly to do this again. So thank you very much. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and please think of all of us and remember us in your
Yes, you
prayers.
remember us too now.
Thank you very
Many
much.
more
Good
things
night,
to
everybody.
do.